Hello, everyone. Welcome to ECSI's presentation today on government assignments from A to Z, better known as Perkins Loan Assignments, A to Z. My name is Chris Stompanato. I'm one of the client relationship coordinators at ECSI. Been with the company for 15 years now and been in the Perkins servicing realm for over 33 years. So I'm happy to present this important topic to everyone today. So this presentation is really going to hit on really three main areas. We're going to start by talking about the communication that came from the Department of Ed back in August and really take a deep dive into what schools really need to be doing right now, especially as we have a June 30th, 2022 deadline that's looming. The middle portion of the presentation really touches on the details of the 1845 government assignment forms, all the different fields that are in that form. And I'm going to probably not necessarily gloss through that, but probably go through that rather quickly because there's a lot of slides there, a lot of data elements, and we really don't have to touch on 100% of them, but just kind of do a little high level. And then at the end, we're going to get into really supporting documentation and a lot of important tips that you can use in the assignment process, ways, things you can do up front to avoid any potential rejections of assignments, which nobody wants, of course. So the communications from the Department of Ed, and actually, I mean, the one that obviously has captured everyone's attention is the one from August 27th of 2021. But the initial communication from the Department of Ed actually came out way back in September of 2019 that talked about mandatory assignments of Perkins loans that are 2 years or greater past due. And that certainly caught people's attention, but I think what's different with what happened in August of 2021 is putting the deadline on it of June 30th of 2022 certainly kicked it up a notch, if you will, with a sense of urgency with this. And so not going through all of this, bottom line is they're requiring the assignment of loans defaulted 2 years or more, unless the borrowers are making payments or making efforts towards making payments. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. If there are loans that fall into this category that for whatever reason cannot be assigned to the Department of Ed, school is supposed to purchase those loans. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well, you know, the timing of when you may need to do such a thing, etc. It is now early 2022, right? Happy New Year to everyone. Part of the communication that the department put out said that in the early part of 2022, which is obviously right now, the department's going to start doing an assessment of what's going on with schools' Perkins portfolios, and just to make sure that schools are making a sufficient effort towards this process. And you know, I think just schools really need to start making a good faith effort here. And you know, if you're just now starting an assignment project or you're looking to in the next month or whatever the case is, it might not necessarily be a bad idea to communicate with FSA, the Department of Ed. They provided an email address at the bottom of the communication for their department that, you know, schools can reach out to just to give them a heads up on what you're doing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, because if they deem that schools aren't taking sufficient steps right now, their next step is to send a warning letter to the school's director of financial aid, as well as the president of the school. And obviously no school wants that to happen. So, and hopefully, you know, for those of you that have been doing assignments, cleaning up your portfolio, you're going to probably be in pretty good shape. So, and this is going to be an ongoing process. I think what's happening right now is what we could called the big cleanup, where most schools have a lot of these really old Perkins loans out there that are extremely delinquent, they're uncollectible, that really should be looked at for assignment. Once that's all cleaned up, you're going to have a much more manageable portfolio going forward. But still, there's always going to be loans that are greater than 2 years past due. That's just the reality. So the assignment process is going to be ongoing. But right now, it's probably the bigger projects that schools are undertaking at this point. And the last bullet point there, if you're required to assign a loan, you're going to assign a loan, you need to recall that loan from your collection agency. And this is going to give you an opportunity to really have discussions with your agency about your accounts. I want to get into that a little bit more in a bit here. The Department of Ed's communication just continued to, this is simply a reminder to schools of the collection process that schools should follow for Perkins loans in general anyway. This information's always been out there for schools. So it just serves as a reminder, that you go through a first and second collection process. You have the ability to litigate, so on and so forth. And then, of course, if collections efforts are unsuccessful, you have the assignment process there. The purchasing of the loan. So if you can't assign a loan, purchasing the loan means the school pays off the remaining principal balance and any accrued interest on the loans that need to be purchased. If there are other fees like late charges and so forth, those can be wiped away. Those go away. It's just the principal balance and accrued interest. A purchased loan has to be reported on the FISAP report the same way as a normal borrower payment would be. So there's a process to post payments in a purchasing situation. If you're an ECSI client, you can work through our client support department. We have a process to help with the purchase. Now, the question is, when does the school actually have to purchase the loan or loans? Theoretically, you really don't have to purchase until the program is truly ending. And let's say you're liquidating, and we'll talk about liquidation in a little bit, or just the program by attrition, right? You run out of loans and that's it. It's coming to a close, and that could be years down the road. Then you would have to purchase any loans that are hanging out there. But if you allow these loans to just continue to sit out there, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to keep accruing additional interest every single month. And that just means your school will have to pay more to purchase that loan down the road. So I know some schools that have identified, a handful of loans where they know it's uncollectible. They know it's going to be impossible to assign the loan. Maybe they're missing the prom note or whatever the case is. And they're going to go ahead and do the purchase now and get it over with. This is a little screenshot and a little shout out to Maria Lavolsi from the SUNY State University of New York system. I took this from one of her presentations, so I hope she doesn't mind. But this slide just shows how the Department of Ed knows each Perkins school, what's going on with their portfolio and what they have out there in loans that are 2 years or more past due. You can see the area highlighted in red at the bottom there, lines 5.3 and 5.4. Basically are your loans that are 2 years or more past due. So that's how they know what you have out there. And of course, they want to see that number going like this, right? In a downward trending. And how does that number go down? Well, there's really, two main ways. One is you have either borrowers paying off their loans or perhaps bringing their accounts current, however they may do that, maybe through deferments or forbearance or whatever the case is, or by assigning the loans back to the Department of Ed. Those are really the ways that number is going to be reduced. So this is really important now, the auditing of your portfolio. Schools really need to be doing this now. Probably should have been doing it a year or so ago, but it's not too late to get to work. And really, you want to review your collection process. If you work with a Perkins loan servicer, most of the stuff, especially on this slide, is likely being taken care of. Just ensuring every account is getting an annual collection attempt, skip tracing bad addresses at least twice per year. Again, a lot of the schools we work with at ECSI, we're doing these processes for our clients. Clean up and reconcile the portfolio, ensure all required due diligence was completed. Again, due diligence largely, a lot of that falls onto the servicer. They take care of due diligence for you. And then clean up NSLDS error report. NSLDS is really crucial to the assignment process. Typically, servicers are reporting Perkins loans for their schools monthly to NSLDS. NSLDS reporting can sometimes result in errors. An error can kick out the report on a Perkins loan. So the servicer should be providing their schools with an NSLDS error report. You want to be checking that. For ECSI clients, if you go to your web reports and you don't have an NSLDS error report for a particular month, that's actually a good thing. That means you don't have errors, because we only produce the report if you do have errors. You can request a reconciliation file of NSLDS to clean up any inconsistencies. And again, this message strictly for ECSI serviced schools. You can place a request through client support to have ECSI on your behalf request an NSLDS reconciliation file, and we'll run it through a reconciliation process with NSLDS to help clean up any inconsistencies. So that's something you could be doing today. Identify the oldest accounts for potential assignment, and make sure you track down the required documents you need. I think one of the things that may happen with schools, you see an announcement like this from the Department of Ed, they're telling you to assign loans that are 2 years or greater past due. So the knee-jerk reaction might be exactly that. I got to start at 2 years past due and work backwards, in this process. And I suggest to schools that the mindset needs to be reversed. You need to look at the oldest accounts first for assignment, and closer to 2 years past due last. I think those loans that are 2 years past due, let's say upwards of 5 years past due, right in there, those should be given more scrutiny by a school, because those are quite frankly the loans that if their borrower is going to make payment, it's going to be more likely those loans. Certainly a loan that's 2 years past due, you're going to have a better shot at getting collection than one that's 250 months past due. So it's just give those loans a little more scrutiny. Talk to your collection agencies. If the agency's closing in on, let's say, they have a loan that is going through the consolidation process, well, you don't want to assign that loan, quite frankly, because you're going to get a payoff through consolidation. So give those loans more scrutiny, because those are considered to be relatively in the early stages of delinquency. Although I think the student loan industry is interesting. I mean, imagine if your car payment or your mortgage payment was 24 months past due. What would happen there? You probably wouldn't have a house or a car, but student loans have traditionally been treated differently. A little more kid gloves on those. So 24 months, even upwards of 5 years or so past due, is still considered early. Take a look at those accounts a little more closely. But track down, the promissory note is going to be the single most important document you have to an assignment process. Any bankruptcy documentation, if applicable, judgment documents. We'll talk a little bit more about bankruptcies and judgments later on in the presentation. Those situations certainly add a level of complexity to the assignment process for sure. Repayment history, that's available in the student service loan servicer system. If you have documents missing, particularly the promissory note, you got to try and identify any alternative documents and have them pre-approved by FSA. I'll talk about that more a little bit later. The point is, if you're missing a promissory note or you got a bad promissory note, let's say one that's not signed, there's still a chance to assign a loan if you have alternative documentation, something that proves the borrower knew or knows they have this Perkins loan. And it could be anything. It could be proof they made payments in the past on the loan. Maybe they submitted deferment or cancellation forms that you have in their file. Maybe they have a signed exit interview in their file, something like that. You want to determine if you're going to do your assignment process electronically or through paper. In the interest of 100% disclosure here, so when we talk about an electronic process for assignments, we're mainly speaking of the Perkins Loan Assignment System, or PLAS. That's a system that does allow for electronic assignments. But again, in the interest of being 100% transparent with everybody that's watching this, and I've talked to numerous schools about this directly, and all good intentions, the PLAS system actually will create more work for you as a school than doing the paper assignment process, believe it or not. And even with the PLAS system, you still would have to mail in original paper promissory notes. So it's not 100% electronic regardless. I know schools that they've done the paper process. When PLAS became available, they switched over, and then they switched back to paper after trying PLAS. So that's just the experience that's out there. I talk about this because I wouldn't want to steer a school to a process that's more onerous than it needs to be. And set a reasonable timeline and account quantity for assignment. I guess that bullet point you could say is a little bit outdated, because when you say set a reasonable timeline, well, the timeline's been set for everyone. It's June 30th, 2022. So, but when we say account quantity, just depends on the size of your portfolio, how you want to approach an assignment process. Do you want to do a large block of assignments just to get them all done at once? Do you want to break it up into more manageable batches, which seems to be the way a lot of schools are doing it? But I think as we close in on the deadline, that's going to drive a lot of that process for schools. Loans that cannot be assigned, you have your small balance loans, Perkins loans under $25, you can write it off so you don't even have to try and assign it. And even if the balance is under $50 and the loan has been billed for at least 2-year period, you can write those off. If the borrower is deceased, you should not assign a loan. And some of these loans are so old, quite frankly, that unfortunately there is a chance that some of the borrowers are deceased. There's a report, and I think I have this later on in this presentation, where we talk about the NSLDS report called Death Status Conflict Report. That's a report you can order through NSLDS, and it will identify for you any of your Perkins borrowers who are showing in the NSLDS database as being deceased based on another federal student loan that they have. And if the report identifies any such borrowers for you, you can use the information on that report to do a death discharge or cancel the loan due to death. And you don't need to track down a death certificate or anything like that. So that could be a little bit of a helpful resource for you. And then there's total and permanent disability accounts. I mean, those go through a separate assignment process. But when you're looking at assigning loans for the reasons of default, if somebody's total permanent disability, you should follow that process, not the default assignment process. So there's 2 types of assignments when we talk about assignments. There's selective versus liquidation. Selective assignment is exactly that. The word selective or select means you're picking and choosing, you're selecting specific loans to assign back to the Department of Ed. And that could be these loans that are 2 years or greater past due, or the oldest ones. That's a selective assignment process. Versus liquidation, which means, the school has made the decision to end their participation 100% in the Perkins program. And in doing so, you need to assign back to the Department of Ed all the remaining Perkins loans that you have that are out there, the active ones. And that's whether they're defaulted or not, you'd be assigning them in a liquidation process. And there's a lot more to a liquidation, and it's certainly an individual school decision to make. Certainly with the requirements for assignments, we've seen certainly some schools moving towards the liquidation process, but I wouldn't characterize it as an avalanche of liquidations. I think more schools are just looking to comply and continue to stay active and collect as much as they can in their Perkins portfolio as it winds down. That way their school can recover as much money as possible as the program does indeed wind down. So with the selective assignment process, step one, school needs to notify the borrower prior to assigning the loan. So that's a requirement. There's a 30-day notification that has to go out to the borrower before the assignment. Step two is the actual assigning of the loans. Things you can get assistance, you want to talk to your servicer, certainly. ECSI has a way we can help our clients more on that towards the end of the presentation, but the assignment of the loans, there's steps you have to go through, and we'll talk more about that. The last step for the schools to report the assigned or school purchase loans to NSLDS, again, typically handled by the servicer. Liquidation, the assignment of the loans, is by and large the same, but there are some additional steps. You have to notify the Department of Ed of your intent to liquidate. This is done through their common origination and disbursement, or the COD system. Some schools are choosing, instead of notifying the Department of Ed up front of their intent to liquidate, they're just going to start assigning loans, delinquent loans, and whittle their portfolio down till it's pretty small and manageable, and then they'll pull the trigger on liquidation and notify the government. So that's another way to do that. You must let your third-party servicer know if you have this intent to liquidate. And then once again, the borrowers have to be notified 30 days in advance of assignment. You go through the assignment of the loans. Step 5 there, you update NSLDS. But some of the different things with liquidation are schools have to perform a final Perkins closeout audit that you could make part of your normal annual audit. You have to remit the final federal share of the Perkins funds. So any of that excess cash you still have at the very end, you have to send the federal portion back. You have to complete a final FISAP report, and then submit an official liquidation completion letter. Actually, the letter comes from FSA to the school, letting you know you're officially liquidated. But a lot of those steps fall certainly on the school. And I would highly recommend, there's a document called the Perkins Loan Assignment and Liquidation Guide. And it's something that I've sent to numerous schools, and I'm happy to send it to anybody who wants to reach out to me. The good thing that they did with the document is they've divided it into 2 sections. The first section is basically how to assign loans. Part 2, the second section, is what to do if you're liquidating. So highly recommended. Review the liquidation sections, certainly if you plan to undergo the liquidation process. This is just a little snapshot of some samples of what the borrower notification might look like, either under a selective assignment or a liquidation process. Here's that middle portion of the presentation I talked about earlier, where we're going to go through the assignment forms, the 1845 form, and kind of want to run through this rather quickly. Really, because a lot of this, if you're going to engage your servicer in a Perkins assignment project, servicer is going to handle most of all of this that we're going to talk about, certainly with the 1845 form. So these are the documents that are included in an assignment packet for a loan. Seems like a lot of documents, but truly it isn't. I mean, the first three bullet points, the institutional certification form, the manifest, and then the borrower and loan information form, that's really all kind of part of the 1845, at least the way I consider it. And those are documents that we certainly produce for our clients that engage us in these projects. The original promissory note, of course, that's very important, or the master prom note. Master prom notes have been around a long time now. When they switched over to where the borrower only had to sign one promissory note, and they could get as many Perkins disbursements under that note. Before then, and I think the date on that was 1992. Prior to that was the older prom note. It was an annual prom note that had to be signed each year that the student received Perkins money. Repayment history, that's needed in an assignment packet. Disbursement records are required only for liquidation. Although I know when our clients do assignments, we produce a repayment history that includes the disbursement records in that history. So it's covered either way. And then you have your judgment and bankruptcy information only if applicable. This is the institutional certification form. This is what it looks like. Basically, it just has information on the school, the school's name, OPID number, their address. And there's a certification section where you have to have a higher level official at the school sign off on this particular document. And typically you have one institutional certification form per batch of assignments you submit to the Department of Ed. So if you submit a batch of 50 assignments, one institutional certification form goes with the packet, right? So you do that each time you do a batch of assignments. You would also have an assignment manifest with each batch of assignments. And a manifest is just a simple report that lists the borrower's name, their SSN, the loan type, which is P for Perkins, whatever the interest rate is and the total amount outstanding. It's just, hey, we've got 50 assignments we're doing here. So we've got all these 1845 forms. We've got one institutional certification form, and we have a manifest report that lists the 50 loans that we're assigning. There's a split issue that occurred after July 1st of 2008. So the department made a change on how Perkins loans needed to be reported to NSLDS for loans made July 1st, 2008 or afterwards. So like, in other words, each year that a borrower would get Perkins, that had to be treated like a separate loan and reported to NSLDS separately. And typically your servicer's handling that. The borrower may actually have just one loan account with your servicer. It looks like one loan, but for the purposes of NSLDS reporting, it's multiple loans. The important thing with that is, and these are newer loans, obviously, it requires them to be split for the assignment purposes. So in the example provided here, if you have a Perkins borrower, they have two disbursement. One was spring of 2016, one of fall of 2017. They need to be two separate assignments. So just something important to keep in mind. Here's the borrower and loan information form, the main part of the 1845 form. It's 2 pages. When you look at these screenshots, it doesn't look too bad, but there's a lot of data elements here. And let's talk about these really quick here. Section A has the basic borrower demographic information, their name, SSN, date of birth, when they left school, their current address, so on and so forth, phone number. Section B has any cosigner information. Many years ago, it's possible on like the oldest of Perkins loans that you have out there, they may have required a cosigner at the time. If that's the case, that information, the cosigner's name and address and contact information needs to appear in section B. Section C has historical information, so the type of loan, What do we mean by type of loan? Well, we use the term Perkins as a blanket to cover all these loans, but many years ago, it wasn't always called the Perkins Loan Program. It was originally the National Defense Student Loan Program, and then the National Direct Student Loan Program, and then Perkins. So type of loan would be depending on how old the loan is. Applicable interest rate. The interest rate has only been 3, 4, or 5% in the entire history of this program, more than 60 years. Most of the loans are 5%. Date of first disbursement, that's required. Has to match the information in NSLDS. Again, this ties back to what I said earlier about how NSLDS is a crucial piece of this assignment puzzle. Date of the most recent or the last disbursement and the date the last grace period ended or will end. Continuing on section C, historical, you have your date of default, which is the date following the day on which payment was due and not received. So the next day is, for the purposes of this, is considered the default day. Not to be confused with cohort default rate, which is calculated a totally different way. Has the loan been accelerated? There's a checkbox that has to be checked yes or no, and an acceleration date. Acceleration just means the entire loan is now become due. And that's very typical. That happens most of the time when a loan is turned over to an outside third-party collection agency. The school is turning over the entire loan for not just the past due amount, but the entire loan for the collection agency to collect on. So that's an acceleration. Has the loan been litigated? Yes or no, and a litigation date. Borrower status, are the in-school grace, deferment, or repayment? And then the reason the loan is being assigned. I think for this discussion, we're mainly talking about either liquidation or refusal to pay, which is, you're defaulted. But there's other reasons to potentially assign loans. Continuing with historical, you have a disbursement amount, which is the original amount loaned to the borrower as indicated in the prom note or disbursement records. And then any principal amount adjusted, which may have been refunded back or never dispersed that reduced the principal, or any principal amount repaid. It's possible that the borrower made some payments at some point and then just stopped making payments, ended up defaulted, and now they're being assigned. Any principal amount canceled. Borrower may have qualified as a teacher cancellation years ago. They got 1 year's worth of cancellation. For whatever reason, maybe they stopped teaching. Circumstances happen. Now they're being assigned. You would have the canceled amount on the 1845 form. And then the principal amount outstanding, which is basically summed up, line 32 on the 1845 form. Section D is more financial information. You have collection costs repaid, interest canceled, interest due. And again, this is all information that's extracted typically from the loan servicer system and populated onto these forms so schools don't have to do it themselves. Collection cost, penalty, or late charges, those are required on the form. And then you have your total amount outstanding, which is line 38, which sums up line 32 and then 36 and 37. And then there's more cancellation details. They want to know the type of the cancellation, what was the percentage rate that was canceled, how much principal and interest canceled, and the service start and ending dates are required. So that was a really quick look at the 1845 form. There's a lot of information that goes on that form. Like I said, if you work with a servicer and they can help you with assignments, they're going to be able to populate these documents on your behalf, which is really a crucial time saver in this process. So the last part of the presentation is to go over some supporting documentation, some tips and tricks, some common errors, things to be looking for. So we again, I can't stress enough the importance of the promissory note in the assignment process. The department wants original promissory notes with the assignments if it's available. I had one school that asked me, they said, well, we don't want to give up our original prom notes. Can we just do the assignments with copies of the prom notes? The answer is yes, But the answer is also that's going to create a lot more work for the school, because then every one of those prom note copies has to be marked as a certified copy. So that you're just creating more work for yourself to do that. They have to be a valid legal instrument, so they must contain signatures and loan amounts and dates. If it's a master promissory note, it must contain the borrower's signature, and the principal amount loan must be substantiated by the institutional disbursement records, breakdown of the disbursements. E-signed prom notes are certainly acceptable. The e-signature of Perkins prom notes has probably been around since the early 2000s. So roughly 20 years or so. So it's been a long time, and a lot of schools moved to e-signature prom notes for Perkins. In some cases, it took them a number of years to get there, but a lot of schools have used e-signed prom notes, and that's acceptable. And once again, a photocopy can be used if the original's missing. It just has to be marked as a certified true copy. And I have a slide that shows you how to do that. Prom note, continuing with the prom note, it must have the borrower's signature for disbursements and or rights and responsibilities. It obviously has to have the name of the school on the prom note. It has to be dated. It must show the interest rate. And it must be signed before the loan is dispersed. More about that a little bit later. I have another slide on that. I'll talk about it a little bit more. Here's the slide that shows you how to mark a copy of a prom note as a true and certified copy. I think the way most schools do it is they just attach the statement on their letterhead to the promissory note. But I've heard some schools have created their own stamp, true and certified copy stamp, that's then signed off on. So you can do that either way. Disbursements that are made under a master promissory note, disbursement records must be provided. And again, that's typically within the repayment history. Includes a breakdown of disbursements, and those disbursements have to show the dates and the amounts of each disbursement. Obviously, repayment histories are common to every single Perkins loan record. Servicers maintain a history. If you happen to be one of the few remaining schools that does your own Perkins servicing in-house, hopefully your in-house system maintained a history. I would imagine you did. And the repayment history is just that. It would have a breakdown of any payments, payment by payment. It would show how it was broken down between principal, interest, and other fees. The history could also show any requests for different entitlements, forbearances, cancellations, deferments, and so forth. The repayment history must be less than 60 days old to be considered current acceptable. So what that means is you don't want to generate a history and wait more than 60 days before you actually submit your assignment on that loan to the Department of Ed, because then this history is outdated. It's going to cause it to be rejected, and you'll have to rerun a new history and resubmit it for assignment. And you need to provide a repayment history whether or not actual payments were made on the loan, because there is other information on the history anyway. Yeah, here we get into judgment. We could almost do a whole presentation just on judgment assignments. I think based on just talking to a number of schools and talking to individuals internally at ECSI, I think there's certainly challenges with judgment assignments, and we just don't see very many, if any, judgment assignments coming through our doors. I think because there's a level of complexity to it. For one thing, you have to transfer the judgment to the Department of Ed. That's not necessarily difficult, but then you have situations where different states have different laws as they pertain to judgments. So some states require that the school notify the courts of the transfer, others don't. So I think a lot of schools are trying to engage their own internal legal counsel to see how to go about dealing with these judgments for assignment purposes. The department also does not have an FSA pre-approval process if you happen to be missing judgment documentation and you still want to try and assign the loan, which means school's going to have to purchase the loans in those cases. You're going to have no chance to assign the loan without the judgment documentation. Also important to note is if you're in the middle, if you have a Perkins loan that right now today is in the midst of being litigated, you cannot try to assign that loan. You cannot do so. You would either have to wait until the judgment is rendered in order to then assign the loan, or you'd have to withdraw the legal action against the loan. In other words, stop the litigation process, and then you can proceed with assignment. Bankruptcy, kind of similar. If you have a borrower that's in the midst of a bankruptcy right now, they filed for bankruptcy and it's, going through the courts and, the process, you cannot assign that loan unless the exception would be if your school is liquidating, or if you're a school that's closing up and you're having to close down your Perkins program. That's an exception. But in general, you're not to assign a Perkins loan that's in the middle of a bankruptcy. You can do that once the bankruptcy's done. If it's by chance discharged in bankruptcy, which is not the easiest thing in the world to happen, but if that does happen, then the account cannot be assigned because it's ultimately going to be canceled due to bankruptcy. But if the court rules that the loan cannot be discharged, and let's say it's dismissed or whatever the case is, then you can assign the loan, and you have to include all the necessary bankruptcy paperwork with that assignment. If you happen to receive a petition for bankruptcy after the account was physically sent in for assignment, then the school should notify ECSI Federal Perkins Loan Servicer so the bankruptcy can be posted. Just to clear up in case there's any confusion in anybody's mind, there's really two ECSIs. I work for commercial ECSI. We work with many, many schools across the country servicing their Perkins portfolios. There's the government side of ECSI known as ECSI Federal Perkins Loan Servicer. They handle, they intake the assigned Perkins loans and they service them on behalf of the Department of Ed. So just to clarify that there are the two ECSIs. A discharge in bankruptcy prevents further enforcement of the loan against the borrower. If it happens to have a cosigner listed, the cosigner is still legally responsible for the debt. And schools should do some due diligence with respect to any cosigners before attempting to assign the loan. And again, these would be really, really old loans that may have had a cosigner from many, many years ago. Common errors. And these errors don't necessarily mean your assignment's going to be outright rejected. Typically what happens is when you submit a batch of loans for assignment, you're going to be waiting for primarily one report back from the Department of Ed, and that is an acceptance report. And that shows you which loans have been accepted for assignment. So that's a good thing. But you could also receive a pending report. So as an example, you might submit 50 loans for assignment, maybe 45 come back on an acceptance report. Great, everything's done. The other 5 show up on a pending report because they have issues that need to be addressed. And then you would have to work with ECSI Federal Perkins Loan Servicer to work out those issues so the loan can be accepted. So again, it doesn't mean it's been outright rejected. It just means it needs a little more information or some attention. So some of these common errors that we see are the disbursement dates do not match NSLDS or the history. Again, NSLDS being very critical to this process. Section D of the 1845 form that I went through earlier does not total up correctly. So that's a common error when schools are trying to do their 1845s themselves. Typically, if you're using a servicer, that should be totaling up correctly because that's all happening systematically. The date of default is after the acceleration date. It should be the other way around, acceleration date after default date. Date of the last grace period is after the default date. Again, it should be the other way around. The reason the loan is being assigned is not checked off on the 1845 form. Remember, you can have different reasons to assign: liquidation, refusal to pay, incarceration. So that needs to be checked off. If you're assigning loans with a judgment, the documents need to have figures broken down, just how that judgment was rendered, Without that, you're going to have a problem assigning a judgment account. The prom note was not signed. Believe it or not, that's a common error. Or missing prom notes. ECSI Federal Perkins Loan Servicer often receives assignments without a prom note. Missing all pages of the prom note. The Perkins Master Prom Note is a 4-page prom note. You need to have all the pages. And the prom note submitted was a copy, which is not necessarily a problem, but it was not marked as a true certified copy, which is needed to make that copy official and assignable. The prom note has altered dates or other information. In other words, there's a disbursement date and then somebody crossed it out and hand wrote another date over it, something like that, and it wasn't properly marked. The date of first disbursement is prior to the date the prom note was signed. I got some further clarification on this, which is in those sub bullets you see there on the slide. And apparently, I talked to a school. This was common practice many years ago, where the school, they used to disperse the Perkins money to the borrowers, and then they would spend that term trying to chase down the borrower to get them to sign a Perkins promissory note. So the borrowers were signing after they had already received the money. So what the Department of Ed says about those situations is, if the date of first disbursement compared to the date that the prom note was signed, if it's within 0 to 30 days, it's acceptable. So no problems there. 31 to 6 months, it requires you have to include a letter of explanation. Why was there this gap between the first disbursement date and the prom note signature? And anything 6 months or greater, you have to go to FSA to get, so you're going to have to do even more of an explanation and get some kind of approval on those cases. So hopefully you don't have any of those, because that's certainly an extremely long gap of time there. If you're missing or you have questionable information, FSA has set up a process. There's the email address where you can get some form of pre-approval. And this is what I talked about earlier. If you wanted to try and assign a loan, you did not have a promissory note, but you thought you had some pretty good documentation, pretty compelling documentation that shows the borrower knows or knew they had this loan. You can, on an individual basis, submit that documentation through this email. It's got to be done through a secure process. And basically, FSA will review those cases and they'll come back to you and say, yeah, you can go ahead and assign the loan with these alternative documents. And then you could just go through the assignment process and use the alternative document instead of the prom note. Or they're going to flat out say, no, we cannot accept it. And then the loan would have to be purchased. You have to figure, the Department of Ed they're taking a risk here, right? They're going to have to make a decision. Should we accept a Perkins loan for assignment without a prom note? So it's got to be pretty good documentation that you have. Here's some important contact information, phone numbers, email address for ECSI Federal Perkins Loan Servicer, where assignment packets need to be sent, any payments that are received on Perkins loans after they've been accepted for assignment, where those should be sent. So this is just important contact information that's good information to keep in case it's needed. From ECSI standpoint, we're helping our clients with these important assignment projects. We have 2 different ways we're helping: standard versus enhanced. Enhanced is what you might think it is. It's ECSI taking on even more of the heavy lifting in the assignment process. If you don't work with ECSI as your Perkins loan servicer, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to help you service your loans and help you with assignments if you're in a situation, you're in a bind, and you may not be getting the help you need to assign loans. We would love to hear from you. But there's my email address, as well as my colleague Laura Allworth's. We're both client relationship coordinators for ECSI, and we handle different states across the country, but we're definitely happy to hear from you. Thank you for listening in today. I appreciate the opportunity to present Perkins loan assignments A to Z. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to help answer them. Feel free to shoot me an email at any time. Have a great day.